Hey there, sweet Luma. It's Denise from LoomaHat.com, and this time I'm going to show you how to knit a super cool, super easy grocery bag holder. And for this project, you're going to need a 24 peg loom, 110 yards of worsted weight yarn, loom hook, needle, and scissors. Alright, without further ado, let's drawstring cast on 24 pegs. Now we're going to be knitting with 2 strands of yarn as one, and I'm going to use a simple knot to secure mine to the anchor peg. You can use a slip knot if you're more comfortable, and then you're going to take your yarn between pegs 1 and 24, and don't worry about the direction. You're going to take the yarn behind peg 1, in front of peg 2, behind 3, in front of 4, and you're basically using a zigzag method to cast on that yarn, and it'll look like this. You see that? Behind one peg, in front of the next, and then just continue to do that in front of one peg, behind the next, in front of one, behind the next, all the way until you get to peg 24, and then you're going to go behind peg 1 and place the yarn in front of peg 2 and lay it loosely over the next 4 or 5 pegs, whatever you're comfortable with. Take the yarn behind that peg and hold it with your hand, with your fingers, and then with your hook you're going to knit off the bottom 2 loops over the top on peg 2, and then you're going to jump to peg 4, and you'll notice that every other peg has 2 loops on the bottom and 2 loops on the top. Alright, grab your working yarn and let's lay it over the next 4 or 5 and hold it on the back side with your fingers, and then knit off every peg that has 2 loops on the bottom and 2 loops on the top. And again, that's every other peg that will have the 2 on the bottom and the 2 on the top. And then you're just going to continue to do that, knitting off all of those pegs until you reach peg 24. And once you knit off peg 24, you're then done with your cast on. You're now ready for rows 1 through 4, where you're going to knit all 24 pegs. But heads up, on row 1, peg 1 does not have a loop, and so you're going to take the working yarn and lay it loosely over pegs 1 and 2, and then take your hook and you're going to knit off peg 2. Now this is only on row 1, only peg 1, because peg 1 does not have a loop. And then you're going to continue to knit. We're using the Uwrap version of the knit stitch, and it's called a Uwrap because of the shape that the yarn takes when you half wrap that peg. Alright, and then you take the bottom loop, 2 bottom loops over the top, and you knit off. And you need 4 rows of the Uwrap. You can use other versions of the knit stitch. I would avoid the Uwrap if you can. If you have issues with the Uwrap, then use what makes you more comfortable. Now as you can see, I'm going to knit off peg 24. That is my row 1, and from here on, peg 1 has a loop on it, and now you can knit regular. You need 4 rows, and while you guys continue to knit those rows, I'm going to take this time to say thank you to Lorena Reese and all of my patrons on Patreon. Thank you so much for all the support for this channel. It's greatly appreciated. Alright, and while you're knitting, don't forget to take the knot off the anchor peg after a few rows, because your yarn no longer needs to be secured after about, I would say, the 2nd row. And then once you knit those 4 rows, you're then ready for rows 5 through 32, where you will start knitting the figure 8 stitch. To work the figure 8 stitch, you're always using 2 pegs at a time. So we have the working yarn on peg 24, and we're going to start working pegs 1 and 2. So take that working yarn and you're going to put it behind those 2 pegs, then bring it forward in front of peg 2, and then take it behind peg 1, bring it back forward to the front of peg 1, and then cross over. So in front of 1, behind 2, and you form that figure 8. Then hold your working yarn with your fingers and take your hook and you're going to knit off those 2 pegs. Pegs 1 and 2 both have a top loop and a bottom loop, so you're going to knit off those 2, and now your working yarn is now on peg 1. Right, you went from 24 to 1, and now you're going to work pegs 2 and 3. Remember, you're always working 2 pegs at a time. Now you're working pegs 2 and 3 as you move forward. So you put the working yarn behind those 2 pegs, right? Pegs 2 and 3. Then half wrap peg 2, go behind peg 3, half wrap peg 3, and cross over. Again, forming that figure 8, right? You're going to then take your hook and you're going to knit off those 2 pegs right there. And you guys have a good understanding of how this is going to work. So from now on, I'm going to let you listen to some music while you knit the figure 8, working 2 pegs at a time.
I know you're on a roll, sweet honey. Let's take it real slow. You know we got what you need, baby. So take it, move along. I said we got what you need, honey. Come and groove along. Come on. Rolling on the highway, you know. Wow. Come on, and groove along. Come on.
One quick note, make sure you know where your peg 1 is. Right here it's for me. I marked it with a little elephant so you could tell, because that is the beginning of a row. Every time you get to peg 1, you're counting a new row.
You gotta feel it. Yeah, you gotta move along. You gotta feel it, feel it, feel it, feel. You gotta feel it, feel it, feel it, feel. You gotta feel it.
On the last row, you're going to want to end once again on peg 24. So you're going to work pegs 24 and peg 1. So do your figure 8 stitch, and this might seem a little odd because you're ending, you think you're going to end up on peg 1, but you don't. Once you knit off pegs 24 and peg 1, you'll see that your working yarn is on peg 24, and now you're ready for rows 33 through 37, where you're basically just going to knit 24 pegs. In other words, you're going to knit the row. At this point, you guys are experts on the Uwrap, and like I said, you can basically use any stitch that you want, but it's gonna look a lot better if you use either the E, the flat, or the true stitch. And once you're done with those rows, now you're ready for the cast off. Now the tricky part here is that you're only going to cast off 21 pegs using the basic bind off, because 3 pegs we want to leave them for the strap. All right, so for the basic bind off, you're going to work 2 pegs at a time, and you're going to start off first by knitting off pegs 1 and 2. This is at the beginning. So you knit off both pegs, and then you take the loop off of the second peg and you're going to move it over to the first peg. And then I tighten things up because I'm continuously tightening my stitches as I knit. So you're going to knit off peg 1, and then you're going to take that loop and you're going to move it over to peg 2. Now you have cast off your first peg. From this point on, you're going to now, on the next 2 that you're working, you're going to knit off the second peg. So peg 2, your new peg 2, you knit off, and then you're going to take the loop off that peg and move it over to peg 1. and you tighten to neaten things up so you can see them better, and you knit off peg 1. Then you take the loop off of peg 1 and move it over to the next peg. Now you have a new pegs 1 and 2, and the process starts over again. You're going to knit off the second peg, take the loop off the peg, bring it over to the first peg, tighten, knit off that first peg, and then you're going to take the loop off of the first peg and you're going to move it over to the second, and now you've cast off another peg. So you're just going to continue this process of casting off one peg at a time using 2 pegs in the process. All right, continue. Remember that you're going to cast off only 21 of your pegs, leaving 3 of them so that you can continue. And this is what it looks like as you continue to bind off. Once you reach those 3 last pegs that you're going to use to make your I-cord handle, you're going to start first by making sure you're on that last peg. So you're going to knit those last 2 pegs just to finish the row so that you have the same amount on every one of them. So you're not counting this as a row yet. You're just getting to the last peg. And then you're going to take your working yarn, which is on peg 24, and from behind you're going to basically wrap these 3 pegs like a flat stitch on all 3 of them. So you wrap it from the back coming towards the front, and then hold it with your fingers, and you're going to knit off. Now the back is going to be loose, so you're going to have to work at pulling on these loops before you knit off. You're going to pull long so that you're tightening the back. And I'll show you the back later so you see what I mean. But once you knit them off, now you pull on the loops again to tighten things up, because they're going to be kind of loose in the back. But you're doing this because you want this to take a specific shape. So from the back with the working yarn on peg 24, you're going to come back towards the front and lay the yarn over all 3 pegs like this. All right, and then you're going to knit off, and always pulling on these loops before you knit off, because you want to tighten the back of these stitches, which is kind of loose. And again, it may seem a little odd. This is not the way you're normally knitting, right? You normally bring that yarn back to the front and you knit back and forth, but that's not what you're doing if you notice here. Now see how far I'm pulling on these loops? That's how loose it is in the back. So you need to make sure that you do this. This is going to kind of round off the I-cord, and it's going to make it strong. Not that the bags are heavy, but you want to make sure you don't have any issues with this I-cord. So again, you kind of like from the back come through the front and wrap, and then knit off by pulling on those strings nice and long and far from the peg, because when you do that, you're tightening your working yarn in the back, which is kind of loose. And you're going to do this for 13 rows. You're going to knit your I-cord. So keep knitting until you have your 13 rows, which in total comes up to 50 rows from beginning to end. Alright, so let me show you what it looks like on the other side when you first start knitting, but don't worry about it. It doesn't stay like that. It only looks like that while you're first knitting. As you knit more and you make the I-cord longer, it starts to get more like a tube, and that will go away. All Alright, once you finish your rows, you can go ahead and now we're going to bind off these 3 pegs. And you can either bring the 2 side ones to the middle, or you could do like I'm doing, which I'm going to continue with the basic bind off. You don't have to do it this way. Like I said, you could just bring the 2 loops from the sides to the middle. And sorry that I'm kind of like off of camera. I didn't mean to do that, but it's the same thing you've been doing. I'm not doing anything different, so you can kind of tell what it is. I'm just a little off from view a little bit. All right, so knit off that last peg, and then you're basically done. You can pull the project off the loom. You'll start to see that the I-cord does take the correct shape as you pull on it and you make it longer. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and cut your working yarn. You need a long tail, so try to make it as long as you can. And by the way, these little puffy flowers here, I love it as a scissor fob, and I do have a pattern. I'll put a link in the description, because that way you can add it to your scissors and you can carry your needle. Now you have to make sure to pull on this, and don't worry about how the end looks, because anyway we're going to close it up right here. We're going to sew that onto it, so it doesn't matter what it looks like, because it's going to be hidden. But right here at the beginning, that's what you want it to look good, and you want to stretch out your stitches, because if you don't, it's going to look really odd. The stitches only look correct once you pull them, especially with the flat stitches and Uwrap. If you don't pull on your stitches, they don't look right. So make sure that you get this done everywhere where you did your knitting, at the beginning as well as the end, and your I-cord, so that it'll take the appropriate shape. And then you want to bring that end over, and you're going to sew it on so that it takes, you know, like a hook, right? And make sure that you almost overdo it sewing this on, because you don't want it to fall apart. You want to make sure that it's nice and secure, and that you've sewed it as best as you could. So I go from end to end and kind of reinforce it to make sure that it's gonna stay put. And then once I feel like I've added enough sewing to it, then I start to wrap it. This is going to make it look better, and it reinforces it and makes it stronger, so that your hook doesn't go anywhere. So once you wrapped it, I think I wrapped it about 6 times, I want to say. I'm not sure, maybe more. I'm bringing my yarn then to the back, and I didn't make mine long enough, so try to make sure you have a long enough tail. You see how I put it through the back to hide it, to weave it in, and I kind of don't have enough yarn to do this well. That's not a good idea. You want to make sure that you have enough yarn to do this appropriately. So I have a habit of doing this. If you watch me often, you'll see this is a bad habit of mine, to not cut enough, not make my tail long enough to weave in my ends appropriately. So yeah, and this is what I love about that little scissor fob, like I said, is that I can carry my needle with me. Now I'm gonna add buttons to mine, so that's what you were seeing. And the bottom part, you need to close it up. Well, you need to tighten it up, but you need to leave an opening, because that's how the bags come out, right? So stretch your stitches and start to close this opening without completely closing it. You want to leave enough space for your bags to be able to come out, but you want to get all the wrinkles out of that top, and you want to make sure that your stitches are nicely stretched. And then you're going to take your needle, and you're going to take those that working yarn, and you're going to feed it through those loops right there. See that? And you really only need to do this one time. I think I did it twice. I think I went through it twice. But you don't need to do that. You're basically just wanting to reinforce this opening because you're going to be pulling on it. Every time you pull the bags out, you're going to be pulling on it. Plus, you want to weave in that drawstring because you want it to look nice and neat. So you see that I've got it close enough so that the bags don't completely fall out, but open enough that that I can pull them out, because if you close it too much, you make it difficult to pull the bag out. So once you feel you have that well enough, then you can go ahead and weave in your end on that on your working yarn. And this time I had enough yarn to do my weaving correctly. All right, and once you're good, go ahead and cut the excess yarn. Put your needle away on your scissor fob, which again, I'll give you a link in the description for this cool project. And then that's it. In my case, I'm going to add a button, and I made a few of them just to give you guys a look at how different they look. And I'm just going to use regular thread. Well guys, I hope you like this project and you'll try it out. Please share my video. That helps me a lot. Give me a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed, do so, and I'll see you next time.